Welcome to Leading Edge. I'm Melissa Andrews in for Jerry Anderson this week. A big announcement by General Motors pouring $760 million into its Toledo propulsion systems facility on Alexis Road to produce drive units for electric vehicles. So what does that mean for Dana, headquartered right here in Toledo? And did you know many areas of Toledo are rumored to be haunted? We'll talk with a local author and ghost behaviorist. But first, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and there is an exhibit honoring victims you can check out right now. Diedre Lashley, Executive Director of the Bethany House, is here to fill us in. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Diedre, I want to start with Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Why is it so important that we highlight this?
Yeah, well, it's a national month to honor and to raise awareness about domestic violence. You know, unfortunately, domestic violence is still a behind closed door issue, and we need the month and we need all year long to really remember and to help to raise awareness about resources that are available, to connect victims to help, and to just help folks recognize the impact that domestic violence is happening all around us.
And this is something that was really made worse by the pandemic, right? Even now we talked and you're seeing an increase even after the pandemic.
Absolutely. Over the last 2 years, domestic violence related homicides have risen by 62% in Ohio. And just locally, we've seen a lot of domestic violence homicides. So yeah, it's definitely now is the time to keep it out in the open and to keep awareness raising.
What do you think specifically about the pandemic or post-pandemic kind of exacerbated the problem?
Well, I think the pandemic, with everyone being isolated at home and, you know, maybe isolating at home with their abusive partner, it can definitely escalate the stress. We were all stressed, right? But the stress can escalate in those abusive situations, and being trapped there, not being able to have access to support systems like we typically would, not having access to being able to leave the house like we typically would. I think we saw a rise in not only fatalities, but in the kinds of violence people were experiencing. We saw a rise in strangulations, and the severity of violence was much, much worse. Since the pandemic, over the last year, we have an 88% increase in crisis calls that we've been taking. So I think now that the pandemic is we're past those stages of isolation, people are really reaching out for help and wanting to make a way to get to the help and the resources they need.
I think one of the biggest things is recognizing some red flags in a person when you meet them before we get into all this abuse. So what would you say are some red flags, and maybe within yourself, that you could be drawn to someone like this? I know there's trauma bonds and there's all kinds of emotional abuse. So what would just be some few things to look out for if you are just starting to maybe date for the first time since a divorce, or you're on dating apps, or you're getting to know people?
That's a great question, because abusers never show up being abusive, right? It starts out great. It starts out very romantic. And one of the bigger red flags that we see is quick commitment. So an abuser will try to sweep that victim off of their feet, be Prince Charming, be whatever that victim is looking for in a relationship they become. And an abuser will have their victim engaged, married, living together, or pregnant within the first 6 months. So it's a very quick involvement, quick romantic, you know, it feels so good. It feels, you know, like this is the person I've been waiting for. And then once that abuser has that commitment and they know that victim can't quickly get away from them, then the facade starts to fall off and their true colors start to show. So the red flags are very hard to see because the abuser is so good at manipulation and just showing what they want to show until they have that commitment. So that quick commitment, that like really quick commitment and escalated sort of relationship, that's a red flag. Also jealousy. If you are with someone who's jealous, and that can also feel kind of good at first, right? So you're just starting a relationship, they're very interested in who you're talking to, what you're interested in, where you're going. That can feel good, like they're asking me questions about my day. But over time, that becomes more and more controlling, more and more stifling. So that jealousy is a big red flag too.
And hopefully people can listen to their family and friends who may be able to spot these red flags a little bit quicker. So we are honoring some of these victims this month with the Silent Witness Project. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Silent Witness Project represents victims from Northwest Ohio who've been murdered through domestic violence. And this was the 21st annual unveiling ceremony that we had this last Monday, and just to kick off Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And through the rest of the month, portions of the silhouettes and the collection will be on display through the region. So we've got, some of them will be on display in Port Clinton, some will be in Bowling Green State University, some are going to Northwest Community College, but we also have a collection of them being displayed at the downtown library. They've been doing a display for us every October for the last several years, so it's great. They're going to have about 10 or 12 of the silhouettes there too this month.
And you guys really work to get to know the family and the friends of these victims so that you could tell their story.
Absolutely. The purpose of the project is really to honor and remember those victims and to not let their names and their stories and their lives to be forgotten. So it's really important for the families to know that their loved ones are being honored and remembered in that way, and that they're not just a statistic. They were someone from our community who's been lost, tragically, but way before their time, at the hands of someone who's supposed to love and protect them. So it's a devastating display and representation of what's happening in our community.
Something else you guys have going on at the Chop House later this month. They're going to be contributing a portion of their proceeds on October 20th to the Bethany House. This is the information. The Chop House will be open to the public as usual, so the tables may fill up early. So you want to make your reservation for October 20th. Let them know you're there to support the Bethany House, and the phone number to the Chop House is right there at your screen. A great way for them to partner with you. Also, someone's watching this. If someone says, hey, I saw some of those red flags that Diedre was talking about, how do they get in touch with you over at the Bethany House?
Well, they can call our office, but they can also go to our website to find some more information. Our referral packet is available there, and other resources are available, like the 24-hour hotline, the 24-hour crisis shelter. There's actually, the national hotline has a chat aspect on their website, so you can chat with an advocate and safety plan safely that way. So lots of great resources on our website.
And be easy on yourself if you are in this situation, I think, and if you have a friend or family member who's in this situation, because isn't it true? It can take many, many times of trying to actually successfully leave a situation like this?
It's a process, for sure, and it's also very dangerous to leave. So we really encourage victims to get in touch with an advocate that can help them safety plan, so that they can make that plan to do it safely and for the long term, for the good. So that they have those resources ready for them when they're ready to make that leap.
All right, Diedre, thanks so much for joining us, and good luck with the fundraiser at the Chop House. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Up next, the transition to electric vehicles begins this fall in Toledo. How Dana, headquartered right here, will adjust, and do we have the workforce and infrastructure ready to welcome such a change? We'll be right back. General Motors is investing $760 million in Toledo as the transition to electric vehicles takes hold. So what does that mean for Dana, which is already a supplier for these types of systems? I caught up with Dana earlier this week to find out.
Joining me now is Bryan. He is the Senior Manager of Corporate Communications for Dana. Appreciate your time here today on Leading Edge. We heard about the adaptation within the auto industry. When it comes to Dana, though, how does the changeover or the revolution, what does it mean for Dana, and what does it look like locally and globally?
So for Dana, electrification really means more opportunity. Our team, our executive leadership team, invested in electrification in 2016 and really gave us the full capabilities to provide what we call a 4-in-1 system. So that's the axle that we've traditionally provided with the addition of a motor, an inverter, and the thermal management, which is a complete propulsion system for vehicles. And so that's really means more opportunities for us to serve our customers. And that means more opportunity for us to be able to develop that work here in Toledo.
So it sounds like you guys have already been doing the work for several years, but is there a learning curve? Do your engineers need to relearn anything in this transition with this technology? We see when we talk about GM propulsion, people on the line, those workers have to essentially relearn. Are you guys seeing that as well?
I think there's two ways to consider this, right? So we have engineers who are really focused on understanding the driveline of a vehicle. How does the axle respond in a certain environment, whether that's off-road vehicles or in trucks and SUVs? And that work doesn't necessarily change from what are the requirements, but it does mean that we bring in additional experts who understand electrification, and we work together with those teams internally to develop the new system in those vehicles. So there's some work that's being done there, and then certainly on the manufacturing side, some of those things change, right? What parts am I putting together? How does that system come together? But what's perhaps more important is that the cultural entity, the things like safety, quality, the things you focus on a regular basis are already a part of the team that we're working with today, and so those are going to be important skills that we'll continue to get leverage into the future as well.
Do you think that there are enough qualified and trained workers out there right now for this type of changeover, or is that something that we really need to concentrate on in our economy, in our hiring, in our education?
So the data says that there's going to be a shortage of skilled workers. And so we've started to look at opportunities to work with, for example, the University of Toledo on a mechatronics program where our engineers can go in and learn some of these new skills. We've also partnered with Owens Community College, where we're working with them at the Dana Advanced Manufacturing Center there to help increase, some of the availability of skilled labor around some of those key skills that are required for our industry and manufacturing. So there's really, yes, we're going to need more skilled labor and people to be able to do the work, but we're also able to, work with our partners locally here in education to continue to fill those gaps and meet those needs.
What's it going to take, do you think, to position Northwest Ohio to be a major hub for EV, not just from production standpoint, but for people to be able to access what they need to feel comfortable even buying these cars?
Yeah, there's a few different things I would say. I think, from an investment standpoint, I think we need to obviously continue to consider the skilled labor we talked about. I think, looking at making sure we're a positive business environment where people want to come and be able to invest is another way to look at that. But I think the infrastructure elements will need to continue to develop, right? Charging stations is something that people will need to see. The short distances we commute to work can be covered largely by the vehicles we have today and can be charged at home. But if somebody's looking to make a long trip, that's where people start to get a little bit of concern. And so making sure that infrastructure is available to them is really important. And it's a foundation we've already started embracing at our company. We've got a number of electric charging stations here that you'll see vehicles plugged into all the time, because it's really the start of the transition that we're going to be seeing over the next decade.
And I know big corporations like Dana, you guys do forecasting. You're looking into the future. What do you see there at Dana EV looking like in the next 10, 20 years?
I think it really comes down to markets. So Dana supplies not just the trucks and SUVs we drive, but buses, Class 8 trucks, construction equipment, mining equipment even. And so each of those markets are actually looking at electrification as an opportunity. So things like buses, I think 75% by 2030 are going to be electrified because they've got a fixed route. They know exactly where they're going. They know how long they need to be able to move. The trucks and SUVs we drive, we're looking at maybe 13% by 2030, right? That's going to be a transition that takes more time. It requires us to talk to consumers and educate them some. But I think there's definitely opportunities across all of those segments, and some are happening much more rapidly than others, but it's certainly coming and coming quickly.
Jared, Bryan, thank you so much. It's an exciting time to hear all of these changes and see how Northwest Ohio kind of fits in the puzzle. We appreciate your time today.
All right. Thank you so much, Alyssa.
We'll be right back.
It turns out in the ghost hunting world, Northwest Ohio is home to many ghosts and haunted places. My next guest has written a book about it. Chris Boris, psychology. He talks about psychology, Eastern philosophy, what we can learn about Toledo history from these ghosts. Thanks so much for joining us, Chris.
Oh, thank you. A pleasure.
So you actually call yourself a ghost behaviorist.
Yes.
What is that?
Yeah, so I'm the world's first, and I call myself that because what I do is very different from what a ghost hunter does. I like to get into the psychological mindset of a spirit. I like to get into the meat and potatoes of a haunting, whereas ghost hunters seem to like to want to come in and just verify that the ghost world exists. I know it exists. I've been there a decade ago.
Similar to Ghostbusters. or something
Right.
like
So
that.
now I want to get into the psychology of a haunting and what drives a spirit. What do they want? What do they need? And how do you remedy those situations?
Okay, so you actually have a classification system for these spirits as well. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I came up with 7 different classifications of spirits. Each one is a different mindset because, like a doctor, he doesn't diagnose every patient the exact same way. And I, as a ghost behaviorist, I can't go into a home and diagnose every spirit the exact same way. I have to tailor my approach depending on what kind of spirit I'm coming up against. Do they have a destructive mindset? Are they introverted, extroverted? And based on how they are acting in that environment, then I can tailor my approach and help them out.
So how are you able to actually communicate with them to find out this information in the first place?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of devices that I communicate with spirits. We've gotten to the point now where you can actually have interactions with spirits and pretty much interview them and figure out, what do they need? What do they want? What's the topography of the afterlife? And really get into a theological debate with these spirits. And it's pretty cool because one of the first things I learned by going out and doing this is that there are certain things that spirits are very, that they tiptoe around. And when I ask them, why is this? They say, well, there are rules to the afterlife they have to follow. It's like, wait a minute, rules you have to follow?
Which means somebody's in charge.
Yeah, so that means, okay, well, that means there's somebody policing you. And if that's the case, then there's a tier system in the afterlife. And then if that's the case, then we get into angels, demons, God, devil, and it just opens the door to a whole series of discussions.
Well, when you talk about that, I'll bring that up. There have to be people who say, there is the heaven and hell. I don't believe in this because of my religion. What do you say to that?
I said
that ghost hunting is.
Yeah, well, we can't label everything angel and demon. There are so many shades of gray in between. And that's why I've come up with the classification system, because you can throw everything into this bag and just come up with figure out what you're talking to.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about this book. It is called
Certainly.
Haunted Toledo. And just reading on the back, you're talking locations everybody knows, like the Collingwood Arts Center, St. Ursula's, the Toledo Yacht Club, the Zoo, Franklin Park Mall. These places, are they all haunted?
For the most part, yes. And I was able to get over 100 firsthand accounts from a bunch of people that I interviewed at these locations: Franklin Park Mall, the Toledo Zoo. There's a Toys R Us in there. There's just a whole plethora of places. And I deep dive into the history. I found a bunch of lost history. There are all kinds of there's 3 cemeteries where buildings were built on that are now super haunted. The Franklin Park Mall is one of them, of course, which is interesting in and of itself. And yeah, there's just so many places within Toledo. There's 50 that I pinpointed in this book.
So what have you been able to learn about the history of Toledo from talking to these spirits?
Yeah, so I just love talking to some of these spirits because, case in point, there's a spirit at El Camino's downtown here, and I had no idea there was even a spirit there. I went in there, and they're like, oh yeah, we have a spirit down in the basement, a male that we interact with. And I'm just like, what? That's so cool. So I went down there and did a little investigation, and through my techniques, I was able to get into an interaction with this guy. And it's really cool because he's from an era, a bygone era, like the 1930s, 1940s. And when you talk to this guy, you could see that mindset kind of come through where he's like, I will only haunt the guys, but I respect the ladies. This is a guy that
Real gentleman.
Yeah, will open the door for later. So it just comes through when you're interacting with him. Very cool.
And what do we need to know about Toledo from these spirits? What are they saying? Is there a tragic background?
Yeah,
Was it a happy time?
Yeah, one of the interesting things I found is there was a big fire downtown in 1895. It was called the Summit Street Fire. It was huge because everything was built out of lumber back then. It was super cheap. So this stuff, it always burned down, and there was always these casualties. So I went into the Firefly Lounge because they said they kept seeing this male figure in the basement with a burned face. So I went down there and I asked him, I'm like, were you involved in this fire? And he's like, yep. So it confirms a lot of my suspicions. And that's not the only place. There's Fort Industry. There's a spirit there that you dive into the history. There was a building behind it that burnt down. There was, I think, a firefighter died in that fire, and another person. But I think those two people still haunt that building.
Wow. And these are places that are really just up and coming here again downtown.
Yes.
The Firefly Lounge and Fort Industry Square. There are people who'll be living over there. What do you recommend people do if they come across a being that they can see like this and they don't know if it's a positive or a negative spirit? 9
times out of 10, they are positive. A lot of these ghost hunting shows, they glorify the demonic ones, And it's kind of sad because people, for the most part, want to know that grandma's still around. And 9 times out of 10, she probably is. You're just not tuned into her frequency to pick up what she's doing around you. And like case in point, I went into another location, Manos, downtown. It was interesting because for years they had this haunting. They didn't know what it was attributed to. So I did a little bit of back history in the place, and I found out that a year before Mano, that's the owner, bought the place, a guy died in the exact location. They keep seeing this figure appear. So with that information in hand, you can help this spirit kind of move on.
All right, Chris, thanks so much. We appreciate your time. Check out the book. It's called Haunted Toledo. You can also check him out on YouTube. We'll be back to wrap up the show after this. Thanks to the Bethany House, Dana and Chris Boris, the ghost behaviorist, for joining us on this week's episode of Leading Edge. You can rewatch the full episode on our YouTube channel or on WTOL.com. We'll see you next time.